Jack Prescott, a man whose life revolved around the cold, hard facts of insurance claims, found himself staring out at the restless expanse of the Atlantic. The salt spray kissed his face, a familiar sensation that usually brought a sense of calm. Today, however, it felt like an icy premonition. The case file in his worn leather satchel felt unusually heavy. The Sea Serpent, a small freighter registered out of Panama, had vanished beneath the waves just 3 days ago. Vanished, not floundered, not capsized. Vanished. It had simply slipped beneath the surface under seemingly perfect weather conditions, leaving behind only scattered debris and a chilling whisper of unanswered questions. Jack's reputation as a meticulous investigator preceded him. He wasn't one for speculation, preferring to rely on verifiable data and tangible evidence. Yet, this case was shrouded in an unusual fog of hearsay and speculation. Whispers followed the Sea Serpent's demise. Rumors of strange lights on the horizon, of an aging captain behaving erratically, and a chilling account from the sole survivor, a young stowaway found clinging to a piece of driftwood, barely alive. He turned away from the churning ocean and headed back towards the bustling port of Norfolk, Virginia. His first stop was the harbormaster's office, a small, cluttered space overflowing with charts, logbooks, and the persistent smell of brine. Harbormaster Thompson, a man whose face seemed etched with every nautical mile he'd ever sailed, greeted Jack with a weary nod. "Prescott," Thompson grunted, pulling a thick file from a precarious stack. "Everything we've got on the Sea Serpent is in there. Not much to tell, I'm afraid. Clean bill of health before departure, experienced captain, routine cargo run down to the Caribbean. Then, poof, gone." Jack spent the next 2 hours sifting through the documents. The ship's manifest listed a standard shipment of canned goods and textiles, nothing out of the ordinary. The crew roster was equally unremarkable, a mix of seasoned sailors and a few younger deckhands. The captain, Elias Vance, had a spotless record spanning 4 decades. Nothing in the official paperwork hinted at any potential problems. "Anything unusual reported before the sinking?" Jack asked, his voice betraying a hint of the frustration he was beginning to feel. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "Well, there's the Stowaway," he said finally. "Young lad, barely 18. Pulled him out of the water half dead. He's recovering at the Norfolk General. Says he saw things, strange things." "Strange things?" Jack pressed. Thompson hesitated. "Talk of phantom ships, lights on the horizon that weren't there. The boy was dehydrated, delirious. Could have been hallucinations." Jack made a mental note to visit the hospital. The Stowaway's account, however unreliable it seemed, was the only first-hand testimony they had. He then moved on to the insurance company's local office, a stark contrast to the chaotic atmosphere of the harbormasters. Here everything was organized, sterile, efficient. He reviewed the Sea Serpent's insurance policy, a standard maritime agreement covering loss and damage. The payout would be substantial, but something about the case felt off. The nagging feeling intensified as he listened to the recorded interviews with the few port workers who had last seen the Sea Serpent. Their accounts were consistent. The ship had departed as scheduled, the captain seemed his usual self, and the weather was calm. Yet, beneath the surface of their mundane recollections, Jack detected a subtle unease. A hesitation in their voices, a slight avoidance of his direct questions. Later that afternoon he finally made his way to Norfolk General. He found Samuel Sterling, the stowaway, in a small, sterile room, his thin frame swallowed by the hospital bed. The young man's eyes, wide and haunted, followed Jack's every move. "Mr. Sterling," Jack began, his voice gentle, "I understand you were aboard the Sea Serpent when it sank." Samuel nodded weakly, his lips trembling. "It was terrible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The captain, he was a good man." Jack leaned closer, encouraging the young man to continue. "He gave me water," Samuel said, his voice cracking with emotion. "His last water. Said I needed it more than him." Jack's eyebrows furrowed. The captain sharing his water with a stowaway during a crisis seemed unusual. "Did he say anything else?" Jack prompted. "Anything about what happened to the ship?" Samuel closed his eyes as if trying to conjure the memory. "He kept looking at the horizon," he murmured, muttering about ships, 3 ships. He said they were coming. 3 ships. Jack repeated, a knot forming in his stomach. The harbormaster had mentioned the stowaway's ramblings about phantom vessels. Samuel nodded, his eyes filled with a chilling fear. "He said they were waiting for him." "Waiting for him?" Jack repeated softly, careful not to pressure the young man. "Did he say why?" Samuel shook his head, his gaze fixed on the white hospital ceiling. He just kept saying they were coming. He seemed scared. Fear. Not the kind born of a sinking ship, but something deeper, more insidious. Jack pressed on, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of this traumatized young man. Tell me about the sinking, Mr. Sterling. What do you remember? Samuel shuddered, pulling the thin hospital blanket tighter around him. It was fast, he whispered, his voice trembling. 1 minute everything was normal. Then the ship started to list. The captain, he was shouting orders, but no one seemed to know what to do. Did you see anything unusual? Any sign of damage? Jack asked, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the calm weather reports with the sudden sinking. Samuel hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. There was water, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Lots of water. Coming from below. Water from below. That could indicate a hull breach, but how? Under calm conditions, a sudden rupture seemed unlikely. Unless... Jack pushed the thought away. He needed more information, more concrete evidence. Did the captain say anything about why the ship was sinking? Jack asked, trying a different tack. Samuel closed his eyes again, his brow furrowed in concentration. He kept talking about a deal, he murmured. A bad deal. A deal? Jack's interest peaked. This was new information, something not mentioned in any of the official reports. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What kind of deal, Mr. Sterling? Do you remember anything else he said? Samuel opened his eyes, a flicker of recognition in their depths. He said he shouldn't have trusted them, he whispered. He said they were going to take everything. Take everything? Jack's mind raced. Was the captain involved in something illegal? Smuggling? Piracy? The thought felt outlandish given the captain's pristine record, but the stowaway's words painted a picture of a man burdened by a terrible secret. He continued to question Samuel for another hour, carefully extracting every detail, every fragmented memory. The young man's account was disjointed, riddled with gaps and inconsistencies, but certain elements stood out. The captain's unusual generosity, his growing paranoia, his cryptic pronouncements about 3 ships and a bad deal. None of it made sense, yet it all pointed to something more sinister than a simple accident. As Jack left the hospital, the evening sun casting long shadows across the bustling streets, he felt a growing unease. The Sea Serpent's disappearance was no longer just a routine insurance claim. It was a puzzle, a complex web of unanswered questions and unsettling possibilities. The captain's actions, sharing his precious water with a stowaway while seemingly obsessed with the horizon, painted a picture of a man facing an unknown threat, a threat far more dangerous than the encroaching sea. Back at his hotel room, Jack spread the contents of the case file across the small desk, the scattered documents illuminated by the harsh glare of the desk lamp. He reread the ship's manifest, the crew roster, the captain's service record. Everything seemed normal, yet the stowaway's account, fragmented and unreliable as it was, suggested otherwise. The captain's fear, his cryptic warnings, his strange generosity. It all pointed towards a hidden narrative, a story waiting to be unearthed from the depths. Jack poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling in the glass like the turbulent currents of the Atlantic. He had a feeling this case was about to pull him into very deep water. Jack awoke with the faint taste of stale whiskey on his tongue and the weight of the Sea Serpent case pressing down on him. He'd spent a restless night, his sleep punctuated by fragmented dreams of sinking ships and phantom lights on the horizon. The stowaway's words echoed in his mind. He kept looking at the horizon. 3 ships. They were waiting for him. It was time to delve deeper, to find some tangible evidence that could either corroborate or disprove Samuel Sterling's fragmented account. His first call that morning was to the salvage company contracted to recover debris from the Sea Serpent wreck site. After several frustrating hours of waiting and navigating bureaucratic red tape, he finally received confirmation that the ship's logbook had been recovered, albeit badly damaged by seawater. A few hours later, a courier delivered the waterlogged volume to Jack's hotel room. The leather cover was warped and discolored, the pages swollen and stuck together. Carefully, he began the painstaking process of separating the fragile pages, laying them out to dry on a clean towel. The log entries, written in Captain Vance's neat, precise hand, provided a chilling glimpse into the final days of the Sea Serpent. The initial entries were routine, detailing the ship's progress, weather conditions, and minor maintenance tasks. Then a subtle shift began to emerge. The captain's entries became shorter, less detailed, filled with growing anxieties about the ship's course and the unpredictable currents. October 27th, one entry read, "Course correction required. Current stronger than anticipated. Engine performance sluggish." October 28th, uncharted currents pulling us eastward. Difficulty maintaining course. Crew uneasy. October 29th, sighting confirmed. They are following us. Maintaining radio silence. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Sighting confirmed. Following us. Who was following the sea serpent? And why? He continued to decipher the increasingly frantic entries. October 30th. They are closer. I can see them on the horizon. 3 ships. Must maintain course. Cargo must be delivered. Cargo. Jack reread the ship's manifest. Can goods, textiles. Nothing that would warrant such paranoia, such fear. Unless... Jack flipped back a few pages, searching for any mention of additional cargo, something not listed on the official manifest. He found it, a single, cryptic entry dated October 25th. Special consignment loaded. Details sealed. Instructions to be opened upon arrival at designated coordinates. Special consignment. Sealed instructions. Designated coordinates. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The captain wasn't delusional. He was carrying an undisclosed cargo, something valuable enough to attract unwanted attention. The 3 ships weren't phantom vessels but real pursuers closing in on their prey. Jack's initial assumptions were shattered. This wasn't a case of a simple shipwreck. It was something far more complex, far more dangerous. He continued reading, his eyes scanning the water-stained pages. The captain's final entries were barely legible, a desperate scrawl of fear and resignation. October 31st. They are upon us. Engines failing. Hull breach. Mayday set. God help us. Hull breach? That confirmed the Stowaway's account of water coming from below. But why a hull breach? Could it have been caused by the pursuing ships? Or was it something else entirely? Jack's mind raced, trying to make sense of the conflicting information. The calm weather reports, the sudden sinking, the cryptic log entries, the Stowaway's fragmented memories. It was a puzzle with too many missing pieces. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The captain's paranoia, his desperate attempts to maintain course, his cryptic warnings about 3 ships. It all pointed to a scenario far more sinister than he had initially imagined. The captain wasn't battling the elements. He was fighting a hidden enemy, a threat that lurked beneath the surface of the seemingly routine cargo run. Jack reached for the phone, his fingers dialing the number of the marine surveyor who had inspected the Sea Serpent before its departure. He needed to review the ship's maintenance records, to see if there was any indication of pre-existing damage that could have contributed to the hull breach. He spent the next hour on the phone, meticulously going over every detail of the inspection report. The surveyor confirmed that the Sea Serpent had been in good working order, with no signs of structural weakness or potential problems. As Jack hung up the phone, a cold dread washed over him. If the ship had been seaworthy and the weather had been calm, then the hull breach couldn't have been accidental. It had to be deliberate. Sabotage. The Sea Serpent hadn't sunk, it had been sunk. This realization shifted the entire focus of his investigation. The captain wasn't just a victim of circumstance, he was a target. He had been trying to outrun, outmaneuver, and ultimately outwit those who were hunting him. The cryptic log entries, the frantic attempts to maintain course, the desperate mayday call, it was all part of a desperate struggle for survival. Jack stared out the window, the bustling port now a blur of meaningless activity. The image of the aging captain, sharing his last water with a frightened stowaway, took on a new, poignant meaning. He wasn't just being kind, he was making a choice. A choice to prioritize the life of another over his own, even in the face of certain doom. The captain's generosity wasn't a sign of weakness, but a testament to his character, his unwavering humanity in the face of unimaginable terror. And now, it was up to Jack to unravel the truth, to bring to light the hidden forces that had conspired to send the Sea Serpent and its captain to a watery grave. The case was no longer about an insurance payout, it was about justice. The realization that the Sea Serpent had been deliberately sunk hit Jack like a physical blow. It reframed everything. The captain's actions, previously interpreted as erratic and possibly delusional, now took on a chilling new significance. He wasn't hallucinating phantom ships. He was desperately trying to signal for help, to outmaneuver his pursuers, to buy time. The image of the aging captain sharing his last drops of water with the stowaway now resonated with an almost unbearable poignancy. It was an act of profound humanity in the face of calculated malice. Jack reviewed the surveyor's report again, searching for any detail he might have missed. The document was thorough, meticulously detailing the ship's structural integrity, engine performance, and safety equipment. Nothing seemed out of place. Then, his eyes fell upon a small, almost insignificant notation tucked away in the appendix. Bilge pump system, routine maintenance completed October 24th. Routine maintenance. October 24th. The day before the cryptic log entry about the special consignment. A chilling possibility began to form in Jack's mind. He immediately called the surveyor, his voice tight with urgency. "Tell me about the bilge pump maintenance. Who carried it out?" The surveyor, clearly surprised by Jack's sudden interest in such a minor detail, consulted his records. "It was carried out by a local contractor, a company called Maritime Services," he replied after a moment. "Standard procedure. Nothing unusual noted." "Give me their contact information," Jack said, his gut churning with a growing sense of unease. He had a feeling this seemingly insignificant detail held the key to unraveling the mystery of the Sea Serpent's demise. He contacted Maritime Services, requesting a copy of the maintenance report for the Sea Serpent's bilge pump system. The receptionist, a young woman with a bored, monotone voice, informed him that the report would be emailed within 24 hours. 24 hours felt like an eternity. Jack paced his hotel room, his mind racing. If his suspicions were correct, then the Sea Serpent hadn't simply sunk, it had been scuttled. And the seemingly routine bilge pump maintenance was the most likely point of entry for the sabotage. The email arrived late the following afternoon. Jack tore it open, his hands trembling slightly. The report was detailed, outlining the standard procedures followed during the maintenance. He scanned the document, his eyes searching for any anomaly, any deviation from the norm. And then he found it, a single line buried deep within the technical jargon. Secondary bilge pump access panel, sealant replaced due to minor corrosion. Minor corrosion. A seemingly innocuous detail. But to Jack's trained eye, it screamed of foul play. The secondary bilge pump access panel was located in a difficult-to-reach section of the hull, below the waterline. Corrosion in that area was unusual, especially for a relatively new vessel like the Sea Serpent. He pulled out the ship's blueprints, spreading them across the desk. His fingers traced the lines of the hull, following the path of the bilge pump system. He located the secondary access panel, his eyes narrowing as he studied the surrounding structure. The panel was situated close to a crucial structural support beam. If the sealant had been tampered with, if a small, almost undetectable hole had been drilled in the hull during the maintenance, it would have weakened the surrounding area, creating a point of vulnerability. Under the pressure of the ocean currents, the weakened section would eventually give way, causing a catastrophic hull breach. Jack slammed his fist on the desk, the sudden sound echoing in the quiet room. It was all so clear now. The captain hadn't been delusional. He had been aware of the sabotage. He had been fighting a losing battle against a hidden enemy, desperately trying to save his ship and his crew. The 3 ships on the horizon weren't phantom vessels. They were part of the plan, waiting to pick up the valuable cargo once the Sea Serpent went down. The captain's generosity to the Stowaway, his last act of humanity, had inadvertently provided the crucial eyewitness account that was now leading Jack to the truth. The realization brought a surge of anger, a burning desire to expose the perpetrators of this heinous act. He grabbed his phone, dialing the number of the local Coast Guard office. "I need to report a possible act of maritime sabotage," he said, his voice hard and unwavering. The Sea Serpent wasn't just a shipwreck, it was a crime scene. Jack's call to the Coast Guard set the wheels of a formal investigation in motion. He provided them with the logbook entries, the surveyor's report, the maintenance records, and his own analysis of the potential sabotage. The Coast Guard, initially skeptical, agreed to open a preliminary inquiry. While they pursued their official channels, Jack continued his own investigation, focusing on the mysterious, special consignment mentioned in the captain's log. He returned to the ship's manifest, scrutinizing every detail. The listed cargo of canned goods and textiles seemed legitimate, shipped by a reputable trading company. But Jack's instincts told him there was more to the story. He contacted the trading company, posing as an insurance auditor conducting a routine review. He spent hours on the phone with their shipping manager, meticulously going over every aspect of the Sea Serpent's cargo. The manager, a harried man named Mr. Davis, confirmed the details listed on the manifest, insisting that everything was above board. "We've been shipping goods to the Caribbean for 20 years, Mr. Prescott," Davis said, his voice tight with impatience. We have an impeccable reputation. We don't deal in anything questionable. I understand, Mr. Davis, Jack replied smoothly. Just routine procedure. We have to verify all details in cases of unforeseen circumstances. He pressed further, asking about any last-minute additions or changes to the Sea Serpent's cargo. Davis hesitated, a slight tremor in his voice. There was a small addition, he finally admitted. A few crates of antiques, consigned to a private collector in Barbados. Antiques. Jack's ears perked up. Antiques could be a cover for anything. He asked for more details, but Davis became evasive, claiming he didn't have the specific information readily available. Jack thanked him, ending the call with a growing suspicion that he had just stumbled upon the first crack in the wall of secrecy surrounding the Sea Serpent's cargo. His next step was to track down former crew members of the Sea Serpent. This proved to be a challenging task. Many of the sailors listed on the crew roster were foreign nationals, scattered across various ports of call. After days of relentless searching, he managed to locate two former deckhands who had recently left the Sea Serpent's employ. He arranged to meet them separately in quiet, out-of-the-way bars, promising discretion and a small payment for their time. The first deckhand, a grizzled veteran named Miguel, was initially reluctant to talk. He'd heard about the sinking, the whispers of foul play, and he wanted no part of it. But Jack's persistence, combined with the promise of a few $100s, eventually wore him down. The captain, he was a good man, Miguel said, his voice low, his eyes darting around the dimly lit bar. But he was troubled, worried about something. Worried about what? Jack prompted, leaning closer. Miguel hesitated, taking a long swig of his beer. There was talk, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Talk of a special delivery. Something the captain wasn't supposed to know about. A special delivery? Jack repeated, his heart pounding in his chest. What kind of delivery? Miguel shrugged, his eyes fixed on the bottom of his glass. I don't know, he mumbled. Something valuable. Something illegal. The captain, he was pressured into it. Threatened. Threatened. By whom? Jack pressed for more information, but Miguel clammed up, fear etched on his weathered face. He'd said too much already. He drained his glass, muttered a hasty goodbye, and disappeared into the night. The second deckhand, a younger man named Carlos, was more forthcoming. He confirmed the rumors of a secret cargo, a deal the captain had been forced into by some shadowy figures. They were dangerous men, Mr. Prescott, Carlos said, his voice trembling slightly. They controlled the docks, the shipping lanes. No one dared cross them. Who were they? Jack asked, his voice sharp with urgency. Carlos hesitated, his eyes wide with fear. I can't say, he stammered. They'd kill me if they knew I was talking to you. Jack reassured him, promising to protect his identity, to keep his involvement confidential. Finally, after much coaxing, Carlos revealed the name of the organization behind the smuggling operation, the Crimson Tide. The name sent a shiver down Jack's spine. The Crimson Tide was a notorious smuggling ring, known for their ruthless tactics and their far-reaching influence within the maritime underworld. He now had a name, a face to put to the shadowy figures who had orchestrated the sinking of the Sea Serpent. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The captain, pressured into carrying their illicit cargo, had discovered the sabotage. He had tried to signal for help, to outmaneuver his pursuers, but it was too late. The Sea Serpent was doomed. And the captain, along with his crew, paid the ultimate price for his defiance. Jack returned to his hotel room, the weight of his discovery settling heavily on his shoulders. The Crimson Tide. He knew their reputation, their reach. Taking them down wouldn't be easy. But the image of the aging captain, sharing his last water with a frightened stowaway, fueled his resolve. He wouldn't rest until justice was served, until the truth about the Sea Serpent was brought to light. The captain's act of mercy, his final gesture of humanity, had ignited a fire in Jack Prescott's soul. A fire that wouldn't be extinguished until the shadows were dispelled, and the perpetrators of this heinous crime were brought to justice. Jack sat in the dim glow of his hotel room, the name Crimson Tide echoing in his mind. It was a name whispered in hushed tones along the docks, a name synonymous with fear and power within the maritime underworld. They were a ghost, a shadow, a whisper in the dark. But they were real, and they had sunk the Sea Serpent. He spread the ship's blueprints across the small desk, his fingers tracing the lines of the hull, the path of the bilge pump system, the location of the sabotaged access panel. The captain, Elias Vance, had known. He had to have known. The subtle shifts in his log entries, the growing paranoia, the cryptic references to being followed, it all pointed to a man aware of the danger closing in. But why hadn't he reported it? Why hadn't he contacted the authorities? Then Jack remembered the stowaway's words. He said he shouldn't have trusted them. He said they were going to take everything. The captain had been trapped, caught between a rock and a hard place. He'd been forced to cooperate, threatened into silence. But he hadn't given up. He had fought back, albeit silently, desperately. Jack studied the chart of the Sea Serpent's planned route, a straight line cutting through the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. Then he overlaid it with the coordinates of the reported sinking, a point significantly east of the intended course. The deviation wasn't drastic, but it was significant enough to suggest a deliberate change of direction. Why would Captain Vance alter course? Was he trying to evade his pursuers? Or was he leading them somewhere? He pulled out the recovered logbook, rereading the captain's final entries. October 30th. They are closer. I can see them on the horizon. 3 ships. Must maintain course. Cargo must be delivered. 3 ships. The stowaway had mentioned them too. Phantom ships, he'd called them. But what if they weren't phantom ships at all? What if they were real vessels, part of the Crimson Tide's operation, waiting at a prearranged rendezvous point to receive the illicit cargo? A new thought struck Jack with the force of a physical blow. What if the captain's altered course wasn't an attempt to evade his pursuers, but a deliberate move to lead them into a trap? He was running out of time, his ship sinking beneath him, but he was still fighting. He was using his last breaths to send a message, a coded plea for help. Jack grabbed the file containing the Coast Guard's preliminary report. It included a list of all vessels that had been in the vicinity of the Sea Serpent at the time of the sinking. 3 ships stood out, their reported positions forming a loose triangle around the Sea Serpent's last known location. The Morning Star, a Panamanian flag cargo vessel, the Ocean Breeze, a Bahamian-registered fishing trawler, and the Silent Runner, a mysterious vessel with no registered flag or known owner. Jack's pulse quickened. 3 ships. The same 3 ships mentioned in the captain's log, the same 3 ships the stowaway had described as waiting for him. They weren't phantom vessels, they were real, and they were connected to the Crimson Tide. He spent the next few hours digging deeper into the 3 vessels, scouring maritime databases, cross-referencing ownership records, tracking their movements. The Morning Star and the Ocean Breeze had seemingly legitimate histories, operating within established shipping lanes, engaging in routine commercial activities. But the Silent Runner was a ghost, a phantom, its existence shrouded in secrecy. No registered owner, no fixed port of call, no discernible pattern to its movements. It was a black hole in the vast expanse of the ocean, a vessel designed to slip through the cracks, to operate beyond the reach of the law. Jack contacted his sources within the maritime intelligence community, requesting any information they could find on the Silent Runner. The response was swift and chilling. The Silent Runner was a known smuggler's vessel, suspected of being involved in numerous illicit operations, including drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and human trafficking. It was a floating fortress of criminality, a symbol of the Crimson Tide's power and reach. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a terrifyingly clear picture. The captain, aware of the sabotage, had deliberately altered course, leading the Silent Runner and its escorts, the Morning Star and the Ocean Breeze, to a specific location. He was using his sinking ship as bait, drawing the Crimson Tide into a trap, hoping to expose their operation to the authorities. But how? How had he planned to alert the authorities? He had no way of contacting them directly. His radio was silent. His ship was sinking. He was trapped. Then Jack remembered another detail from the stowaway's account. He kept looking at the horizon, muttering about ships, 3 ships. He said they were coming. 3 ships. Not just any 3 ships. The Morning Star, the Ocean Breeze, and the Silent Runner. The captain hadn't been hallucinating. He had been using the presence of these 3 vessels as a coded message, a signal to anyone who might be watching, a silent cry for help. But how would anyone know to interpret his message? How would they know to connect the presence of these 3 ships to a distress call? Then Jack remembered one final crucial detail from the captain's log. Mayday sent. The captain hadn't just sent a standard Mayday call. He had timed it precisely, synchronizing it with the arrival of the 3 ships at the prearranged rendezvous point. He was using the appearance of the 3 vessels as a visual confirmation of his distress call, a way of saying, I am here. I am in danger. These 3 ships are the reason why. It was a brilliant, desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to expose the Crimson Tide and bring them to justice. And it had worked. The Coast Guard, alerted by the timed Mayday call and the unusual presence of the 3 ships in the area, had logged the event. They had dismissed it as a routine distress call from a sinking vessel, but the information was there, buried in their records, waiting to be unearthed. Jack had found the missing piece of the puzzle. He now had the evidence he needed to connect the Crimson Tide to the sinking of the Sea Serpent. The captain's desperate gamble, his final act of defiance, had given Jack the key to unlock the truth. The clock was ticking, but Jack was finally closing in on the perpetrators of this heinous crime. The captain's mercy, his selfless act of giving his last water to a freezing stowaway, had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to justice being served. Jack felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of purpose that sharpened his focus. He had the pieces of the puzzle, the connections, the motive. Now he needed to solidify the evidence to build an airtight case against the Crimson Tide. He contacted the Coast Guard again, this time armed with his new findings. He explained his theory about the captain's coded message, the timed Mayday call, the strategic positioning of the 3 ships. The Coast Guard, initially hesitant, began to take his theory seriously. The captain's actions, previously dismissed as the erratic behavior of a desperate man, now took on a new, chilling significance. The Coast Guard launched a full investigation, focusing on the 3 vessels identified by Jack. They subpoenaed their logs, their communication records, their cargo manifests. They interviewed crew members, port authorities, shipping agents. The net was closing in on the Crimson Tide. Jack worked closely with the Coast Guard investigators, sharing his insights, providing context, connecting the dots. He focused on the Silent Runner, the ghost ship at the heart of the smuggling operation. He discovered that the vessel was registered under a series of shell corporations, its true ownership obscured by layers of legal obfuscation. But with the help of his contacts in the maritime intelligence community, he began to peel back the layers, tracing the ownership trail back to a shadowy holding company based in the Cayman Islands. The holding company, in turn, was linked to a network of offshore accounts, all leading back to a single individual, Victor Martel, a notorious underworld figure known for his involvement in various illicit activities, including smuggling and money laundering. Martel was the mastermind behind the Crimson Tide, the puppet master pulling the strings from the shadows. The investigation into the Morning Star and the Ocean Breeze yielded equally damning results. Their logs revealed that they had deviated from their planned routes, converging on the Sea Serpent's location at the precise time of the sinking. Their communication records showed a flurry of encrypted messages exchanged between the 3 vessels in the hours leading up to the event. Their cargo manifests, initially appearing legitimate, were discovered to be falsified, concealing the true nature of their cargo: weapons, drugs, and other contraband destined for the black market. The evidence was mounting, painting a damning picture of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. The captain of the Sea Serpent, Elias Vance, had stumbled upon the Crimson Tide's operation, becoming an unwitting pawn in their deadly game. He had been pressured, threatened, and ultimately silenced for his refusal to cooperate. But in his final moments, he had turned the tables, using his sinking ship as a weapon, sending a coded message that would ultimately expose his killers and bring them to justice. The Coast Guard, armed with the overwhelming evidence gathered by Jack and their own investigators, moved swiftly. They intercepted the Morning Star and the Ocean Breeze in international waters, seizing their illicit cargo and arresting their crews. The Silent Runner, however, remained elusive, slipping through the net like a phantom in the night. Victor Martel, tipped off by his network of informants, had vanished, disappearing into the labyrinthine world of offshore havens and shell corporations. Despite Martel's escape, the dismantling of his operation was a significant victory. The Crimson Tide, once a formidable force in the maritime underworld, was crippled, its network disrupted, its reputation shattered. The arrests of the Morning Star and Ocean Breeze crews sent shockwaves through the smuggling community, a stark warning that their days of operating with impunity were over. Jack, standing on the deck of a Coast Guard cutter, watching the seized vessels being towed into port, felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The captain of the Sea Serpent, Elias Vance, had not died in vain. His courage, his defiance, his final act of mercy had paved the way for justice. The 3 ships that had waited off his bow on that fateful morning weren't just witnesses to his demise. They were the instruments of his revenge, the unwitting accomplices in his final desperate gamble. The sea had claimed the Sea Serpent and its captain, but it had also yielded its secrets, revealing the truth that lay hidden beneath the waves. And Jack Prescott, the insurance investigator who had started with a simple claim, had become the instrument of justice, bringing to light the dark deeds of the Crimson Tide and ensuring that their reign of terror was finally brought to an end. The case was closed, but the whispers of the deep would forever carry the story of Captain Vance's courage, a testament to the enduring power of human decency in the face of unimaginable evil. Jack stood on the Norfolk pier, the biting wind whipping at his coat. The Morning Star and the Ocean Breeze, now under Coast Guard custody, were docked nearby, stark reminders of the Crimson Tide's shattered operation. The case was officially closed, the perpetrators apprehended, justice served. Yet, a sense of unease lingered, a feeling that the story wasn't quite over. Victor Martel, the mastermind behind the entire operation, was still at large, a ghost haunting the edges of the investigation. He pulled out the worn, water-damaged logbook of the Sea Serpent, flipping back to Captain Vance's final entries. He reread the cryptic messages, the growing paranoia, the desperate pleas for help. The captain's last act of sharing his water with Samuel Sterling, the young stowaway, resonated with a new, profound significance. It wasn't just a simple act of kindness, it was a testament to the enduring power of human compassion, a beacon of light in the darkness of the Crimson Tide's depravity. Jack had initially seen the three ships on the horizon as symbols of menace, harbingers of the Sea Serpent as doom. Now he understood their true meaning. They weren't just witnesses to the sinking, they were part of a carefully orchestrated plan, a prearranged rendezvous for the illicit cargo exchange. The captain, refusing to comply with the smugglers' demands, had sabotaged the transfer, manipulating the situation to his advantage. His altered course, the timed Mayday call, the cryptic references to the three ships in his log, it was all part of a desperate, ingenious plan to alert the authorities. He had known he was running out of time. He had known the odds were stacked against him. But he hadn't given up. He had fought back, using his last breaths to expose the truth, to ensure that justice would ultimately be served. And Samuel Sterling, the young stowaway who had been the unwitting recipient of the captain's last act of mercy, had played a crucial role in unraveling the mystery. His fragmented memories, initially dismissed as the ramblings of a traumatized survivor, had provided the critical pieces of the puzzle. The captain's strange behavior, his obsession with the horizon, his cryptic warnings, it all made sense now. He wasn't delusional, he was sending a message. The three ships weren't just there to collect the contraband. They were meant to be witnesses, unwitting participants in the captain's final act of defiance. By timing his Mayday call to coincide with their arrival, Captain Vance had created a coded message, a signal that only someone with an intimate knowledge of the situation could decipher. He had used the presence of the three ships as a visual confirmation of his distress call, a way of saying, "These are the perpetrators. They are here. This is not an accident." The captain's mercy had unforeseen consequences. By saving Samuel's life, he had inadvertently preserved the crucial eyewitness account that would ultimately lead to the Crimson Tide's downfall. Samuel's testimony, corroborated by the captain's log entries and the Coast Guard's records, had provided the irrefutable proof needed to expose the conspiracy. The captain's act of kindness, his final gesture of humanity, had rippled outward, setting in motion a chain of events that had ultimately brought the perpetrators to justice. Jack closed the logbook, the worn leather cover feeling warm in his hands. He looked out at the bustling port, the ships coming and going, the seagulls circling overhead. The ocean, vast and unforgiving, held countless stories, tales of courage and cowardice, of triumph and tragedy. The story of the Sea Serpent was one such tale, a story of a captain who had faced unimaginable evil and chosen to fight back, even in the face of certain death. He had lost his ship, his crew, his life. But he had won in the end. He had exposed the truth, ensured that justice was served, and left behind a legacy of courage and compassion that would echo through the whispers of the deep. He thought about Samuel Sterling, the young stowaway who had survived the ordeal. He had visited Samuel again at the hospital, sharing with him the details of the investigation, explaining the captain's final, desperate gamble. Samuel, still traumatized by the events, had listened intently, his eyes wide with a mixture of grief and understanding. He had lost everything, his family, his home, his future. But he had also gained something invaluable, the knowledge that the captain's sacrifice had not been in vain. The captain's final act of mercy, his selfless decision to share his last water with a freezing stowaway, had ignited a spark, a flicker of hope in the darkness. That spark had grown into a flame, illuminating the truth, exposing the evil that lurked beneath the surface. And that flame, fueled by the captain's courage and Samuel's testimony, had ultimately burned down the house of cards that Victor Martel and the Crimson Tide had built. Jack turned away from the pier, the wind at his back, the cries of the gulls fading into the distance. He had done his job. The case was closed. But the story of the sea serpent, the story of Captain Elias Vance, would stay with him forever. A reminder that even in the darkest depths of the ocean, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit could endure, the flame of hope could still flicker, and the price of mercy could sometimes be justice itself.